you.
You can manage satellites, but when it comes to streaming services, you'll leave that.
Not so much.
All right. It looks like it is starting now, but I need to do one more thing. And if you do see this, it looks like Ruth Ann is there, Heidi Metzen. Let me see. Okay, yeah. I think we're going live here, so we'll let some people join. Just make sure that I've got things lined up here on YouTube. I'm going to. There we go. Okay. Looks like we're live. Very cool. Well, yeah, we're going to go for, I don't know, we'll kind of play it by ear, something like 90 minutes or so with this interview. Really looking forward to diving into some of this stuff. I appreciate, by the way, Alina, you giving me somewhat of a timeline of your career so far in life. That's really helpful, and we'll go over some of that stuff and some photos as well. Very cool. Yep, we've got Bonnie, Priscilla, Sandra, Joy. Appreciate everybody jumping in today. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started since it looks like we are actually up and running. YouTube's good, Facebook's good. Looks like we're good to go. So welcome officially, Alina, to ALC Interviews. Just as a reminder to folks, this is a series that I'm doing of live interviews in front of the ALC Facebook community, also streamed on YouTube, where I interview people from our community with interesting stories to tell, interesting careers, maybe somewhat unusual, just things that probably most of us are not all that familiar with. Maybe we don't even know they're doing them. So just kind of putting these stories out there, because I love this stuff. I would do it even if nobody watched, just because it's fun for me. I'm Jamin Holmgren, of course, and with me is Major Alina Mattson. And first off, Alina, we got to start with a "Whose girl are you" segment. Whose girl are you?
Jamin, thanks for having me. At first, when you reached out and asked if I'd do this, I was like, I don't know. That sounds really scary. But I decided, you know what? Why not? So here we are. I am Alina Mattson. Ted and Sue Mattson are my parents. I was born in New Hampshire, moved to Washington when I was 3. So I've got ties on both coasts and ties everywhere in between too. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of who I am and where I'm from.
Yep, very cool. Well, of course, I know your mom and dad very well, having attended the Hawkinson Church for many years, and my dad being a pastor there. So you grew up mostly out here then, it sounds like, yes, over on the West Coast. And where do you live now?
So right now I am in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I've spent the majority of my career here, so about roughly 7 years total. Did a quick break in Alabama, but came right back to Colorado Springs as soon as I could. So this kind of feels like second home for me. So yeah, I call Colorado home for now.
Very cool. And we'll get more into kind of your pathway to get there in a second, but I do want to say hi to your mom, Sue. And of course, we have Ruth Ann, Gary Bertram. It says Gary and Cheryl are watching. Ruth Ann is watching from Nebraska, Ruth Ann Sorensen. And Shirley Lampinen, my aunt, says hi from us. Stan served in the Air Force from 1971 to 75. And Carl Mattson. Whoa. Uh-oh, what happened? I just lost it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sometimes I'm not very good at computers either. Carl Mattson says hi, and Sally Sepinen says hi.
Hi, everyone.
All right. So you grew up here. You went to school here. What high school actually did you go to?
Battlegrounds.
Okay.
I did my senior year there.
Okay.
Homeschooled for 11 years and then decided to
Yeah.
try Battleground for my senior year.
Okay. All right. And did you go to college?
I did, yeah. So 2 years at Clark College in Vancouver,
Mhm.
and then 2 years at WSU Vancouver. Got a bachelor's degree in social science, which is about the randomest, most non-technical degree that you can get, just a
Mhm.
mix of history and psychology and any other class. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
So very non-technical degree, but the Air Force didn't care, and they took me and put me in a very technical job. And during the 4 years that I was in college in the Vancouver area, I was also doing college ROTC at the University of Portland.
Mhm.
So commuting down to Portland a couple times a week to do Air Force training.
So ROTC, why did you join ROTC? What was sort of your thought process there? Were you already looking at an Air Force career, or was it something just kind of intermediate?
Well, it was kind of a long path to get there.
Mhm.
But it kind of started in my mid-teens.
Okay.
And so probably, I don't know, like 14, 15 years old. Ryan and Barry Matson. So Matson
Yeah,
with
I
two
know them.
T's, so not related to me, but they came to Hawkinson Church wearing their Air Force uniforms.
Mhm.
And I thought that was pretty cool. And I was like, well, I want to do that. And so that was kind of where the seed kind of got planted, right when I was a teenager. And then when I was at Battleground High, my first semester there, my chemistry lab partner, she was in junior ROTC at Battleground.
Mhm.
And she talked me into doing junior ROTC for my senior semester. And while I was there, the colonel who was in charge of the ROTC program, he asked me, like, well, what are your plans after graduating? It's like, well, sir, my plan is to enlist in the Air Force. That's what I'm doing. He's like, no, you're not. And so he's like, have you ever heard of college ROTC? I was like, no, tell me more. So he brought me to the University of Portland and introduced me to the college ROTC program there. And it made a lot of sense with what they were saying. I was like, okay, yeah, I think this is the path for me. So that was kind of how I got on the Air Force officer track. And it was just kind of a series of people that were just placed in my life at specific times and kind of put me on that path. And it seemed to make a lot of sense. And God opened the doors, and
Yeah.
that's I don't know, I ended up here somehow.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting, because I think Barry and Ryan both they were both officers as well. Isn't that correct?
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Air Force
Yeah.
Academy, I believe.
Yeah. Air Force Academy, right. And of course, Steve Staudinger, who I think at some point I was actually just chatting with him a couple days ago. I would like to have on as well. He went the enlisted route, but then ended up as an officer as well. So he has a little different story. Can you really quickly, for people maybe not as familiar with the military, explain what's the difference between enlisted and officer?
Sure. So enlisted is kind of the entry-level position to the military. Roughly 70% of the military force is enlisted. So that's the majority. And you don't need a college degree to go enlisted. You can enter right out of high school at 18 and just start your military career right off the bat. For officers, they're like, the first requirement is that you have to at least have a bachelor's degree. And then there's also a couple different routes to get to officer, but you do have to go through some kind of specific officer training. You can go to the Air Force Academy, you can do an ROTC program like I did, or there is also a course called Officer Training School, which is another path that a lot of times enlisted members who transition to officer will do the Officer Training School route. But there's a couple different paths to get there.
Okay. I've heard about all of these paths before in kind of separate ways, but never really put it together that there were kind of three paths, that you might take, and you might, because of your circumstances, might choose one or the other. That makes sense. And that was like 2003 to 2007, based on your career timeline that you gave me.
Right.
an interesting time because of what was going on in the world.
Right.
Did that cross your mind as you were going through it? Like, hey, I could end up deployed.
It did.
Yeah.
And then obviously when I was in college, I didn't know which career path
Right.
that I was going to end up in, because you typically don't get that until your senior year.
Right.
But it did cross my mind, and I was ready for it if it came to that.
Yeah.
Ironically, I ended up in a career field that doesn't deploy.
Right.
So I've had maybe a little bit of a non-typical military career that I've been in for 16 years and never deployed once. And that's just because the career field that I ended up in, which is like I started in missile operations and then transitioned to space operations. Both of those career fields are primarily based here in the United States. So there's no need to go overseas.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Beth Roberts is watching. We have your Uncle Will says hi. And yeah, Beth is watching from Minnesota. Thank you for
Very
checking
cool.
in. I appreciate it. It's nice to see people checking in from different places. So ROTC, you graduated from college and you went to, so like, you get to choose, like, are you looking at a menu list of things, or are they just like, hey, Alina, you're going here, like what sort of, like, you went to space and missile training in Vandenberg, but like,
Right.
how did that happen? Did you choose it, or do they just assign you?
Well, they give you the illusion of choice. So like our senior year is like, well, give us your top 5 choices.
Yeah.
So I gave my top 5 choices of career fields that I thought sounded interesting. And ironically, space and missile operations was not on there. I think my top choice at the time was intelligence. I thought that sounded really cool. So that didn't happen. So they're like, that's nice, but we think you should be a space and missile operator. And so, at the time, I didn't care. I was like, I just want to graduate and start a job and start making, start being an adult. And so when I got my assignment, I was like, okay, that sounds cool. Let's see what this is all about.
Like space and missile training, like, did you have an idea what that meant at the time? Or, like none. Okay.
None.
So it's not like you grew up like, like a huge like space nerd, or like reading about ICBMs or any of this stuff, like not necessarily. Yeah.
No, it was definitely a surprise.
Okay.
And a whole new world once I got to training. Yeah.
Well, I remember my dad, because there was a Navy recruiter. I had good ASVAB scores, the test that you take, in high school, for military aptitude or whatever. And I had really good scores, and so the Navy recruiter was coming and telling me, oh, you could be like a nuclear technician or something like that. And I told my dad, and he said, yeah, that means you're going to be sweeping out a reactor room. So that stuck with me. That was sort of that illusion of choice, I guess. He didn't have a lot of faith in them to place you necessarily where they promised you. But you did end up on a really interesting and cool career. So at that point, you went to North Dakota.
Yeah. Yep.
Actually, before we move on, what was the space and missile training at Vandenberg in California like? Like, what types of things were you doing there?
Yeah. So the Air Force does all of their space and missile training for people who are assigned to those career fields. That is Vandenberg Air Force Base, now Vandenberg Space Force Base, California, kind of on the right on the coast of California, kind of central California. It's a gorgeous area. But they have a series of simulators. Yeah, that's my class. I'm down there in the bottom left with my crew partner. And this is specifically for intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM training. So ICBM crews train in pairs of 2. And so that's me on the bottom there with my crew partner. And they have simulators that simulate the exact equipment of the ICBM systems. And it's about 9 months of training. You have to practice over and over and over again about how to launch missiles. But again, it's all a very contained, separate, simulated environment. So you're not actually interacting with real missiles, real nuclear weapons until they're 100% positive that you're ready. So it's just
yeah,
a lot of practice, a lot of training. We had to sign a paper saying that if the president directed us to launch, that we would in fact launch.
wow.
And I actually did know a couple people that once they were presented with that option, they decided, you know what, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
And declined to sign, and were reclassed into different career fields.
That would be something else, because obviously pushing a button is, well, I don't even know. Is there a big red button? Like it seems like there would be, but I guess I don't know how that even works. But
no, there's no button.
No big button. But that would be tough. I mean, because that's a very that's a big responsibility. I guess we should jump backwards in the pictures just for a second.
Oh, sure.
Since we've been talking about these things.
Pull up. So this photo, this is taken in 2005 at Ellsworth Air Force Base in Rapid City, South Dakota. And this was during the Air Force equivalent of boot camp, basically. So that is me at the tender age of 20.
Yep.
And the old school uniforms, with a couple girls that were in my training flight. And that was taken under a B-1 bomber.
Oh, okay. B-1 stealth. Mark Johnson is tuning in from Florida, and Steve Stottinger says, "Hey, Alina, thanks for representing the Air Force in the interview." Okay, and here's
just a graduation photo with my sister Rachel. This is my graduation from WSU Vancouver in 2007. And then right after that, couple days later, this is my mom pinning on my second lieutenant gold bars. This was taken at my aunt and uncle Paul and Helen Turbo's house, since I lived with them while I was in college. So she is, I commissioned as a second lieutenant in 2007, and my mom is pregnant with my baby sister, Michelle. And Shelly was born the day after this photo was taken.
Wow. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I've always had fun my entire career telling people that I'm the oldest of 11. Yeah. And seeing their reactions, it's always fun.
Yeah, indeed. Wow. Yeah. Let's see. And then we have, of course, then on to Vandenberg.
Yep. So Vandenberg, so I graduated in 2007, moved from Washington, just 14 hours down the coast to California, and was there for about 9 months of training, and graduated from the ICBM training class in 2008, and they shipped me off to North Dakota after that.
All right. And let's see, do we have a photo of, right here.
Yeah. So some things are just better explained with pictures, right?
I agree.
So I was assigned to Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, to work with ICBMs. So the U.S. has ICBMs in 3 states. There's Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota. And I lucked out and got North Dakota. So you can kind of see up in the right-hand corner, like that gray shaded area. That is the entirety of the missile complex in North Dakota. It's about 8,000 square miles. This is huge. And then if you see kind of the red dots interspersed with the black dots, the red dots are launch control centers. So there's 15 of those total, and each control center is connected to 10 missiles. So those are the black dots. So 15 control centers, 10 missiles, that's 150 missiles. Each control center has a crew of 2 people underground 24/7. And so that was my job, to be underground, ready to launch ICBMs at the president's direction if it came to that.
Wow.
And roughly, So like I said, this complex is huge and spread out over miles. So it would take about an hour to an hour and a half drive from base for myself and my crew partner to get out to our launch control center, driving our, dark blue government Chevy or Ford pickup trucks. And yeah, we would drive out to site and spend 24/7 or 24 hours underground at a time before the next crew came out the next day to relieve us.
Wow.
And then just kind of as a point of interest, if you kind of see on the left, I circled in blue, Belden, North Dakota. So there's actually an ALC church there. So that was kind of, I had no idea until I actually moved to Minot that we did have a church there, but your mom and dad came out a couple of times while I was there. The Western Mission sent him out to preach. So I made it out there when they were there. Also saw Marvin and Marilyn Carlson. They would come out to visit us since Marilyn's sister lived in North Dakota and attended the Belden Church. So that was just kind of cool to see familiar faces in kind of an unexpected place in the missile field of North Dakota.
Yeah, well, Belden definitely, that's where my grandpa Clarence Holmgren grew up, in that area.
Okay.
So we have roots in that area for sure. I've been through there. It's kind of desolate. There's not a lot going on. Yeah.
Cold in the winter.
Cold, right. So probably a good place to put missiles.
That's what the Air Force thought.
Yeah, right. And these missiles, I mean, just for people unfamiliar, I mean, this is something that can go, I don't know, like, can they hit everywhere in the globe?
They are, they're intercontinental. So it is basically our global strike capability.
And obviously something that you would never want to have used. The best result of these is that they get decommissioned eventually and we never have to use them,
That's the hope. Yes, for sure.
Very cool. So let me see, make sure I have my, so you spent 4 years there. And these, now you mentioned the Minuteman III. Is that what these are? These are Minuteman III?
Minuteman III. This is an old system. They introduced the first iteration of the Minuteman in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, during the height of the Cold War. And then they've upgraded the missiles throughout the years, but these are old systems. I can't even describe how ancient some of the equipment is, but there is talk now of upgrading to newer systems now. So we'll see what happens with that. But these, as of today, these missiles are still on alert right now.
Right.
And so the photo that you've got up right now, this is the picture of a missile alert facility. So, just a nondescript brown building in the middle of a field. And you would have no idea necessarily driving by that 100 feet underground, there is a concrete nuclear launch control center with two people inside of it.
Right.
So I spent many hours underground these facilities in North Dakota.
You wouldn't think that being in like a space oriented part of the Air Force, you would spend most of your time underground. But I guess that's surprised. Yeah, right. Now you gave a let's see if I can make this happen. Give me a second here. This might or might not work. I'm hoping. Okay. Actually, no, I have to stop the share. I'd like to show a video you posted of a launch. No, I have to find the right spot there. You sent me a video. Well, this one may or may not work. Let me see here. Yeah, I think we could probably watch a few seconds of this just to show people what we're dealing with here.
Okay.
Okay, share the sound, optimize for video clip, and hopefully this works. There's a missile taking off.
Yep. And we actually just tested an ICBM flight last night, yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Out of Vandenberg Space Force Base. That's where they'll test missiles maybe every year or so, just to make sure that everything's working. And that, like, what we fired one last night.
Wow. Were you involved in that?
I was not.
Okay.
No. So I actually haven't been in the missile career field for several years now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, like the one that was fired last night, I wasn't involved in it, other than that my current job that I have tracks every missile launch in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's how I was kind of aware of it, but
Gotcha.
I wasn't actually involved in the launch.
Well, we'll be getting into that a little later, but my assumption is they let you know beforehand, like, hey, we're doing this.
Yes.
Don't get alarmed.
For sure. Yes. Yep. There's plenty of notifications.
Right.
Everybody knows everywhere that this is just a test.
Right. Yeah. Including other countries. So, like,
yes.
We're launching
sure.
something, but it's
definitely a lot of diplomatic channels that happens behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Just so nobody gets alarmed.
Right. That's one thing that's been interesting about your career, is that you are involved in a part of our military that is very, like, I guess there's a lot of politics around it.
There are. It's very political, and you have to be very careful about the actions that you take, the words that you say,
right,
and just the message that sends globally.
Yeah, totally. So that's essentially a mission from start to finish, a launch from start to finish.
Yes. Yep. And so what they'll do is every year the Air Force will randomly select a missile from one of the 3 missile bases, and they'll pull it out of the silo and ship it to Vandenberg Space Force Base to test launch. And then one lucky crew from whatever base that missile came from actually gets to go to Vandenberg and turn the keys to launch the missile. And
wow.
Unfortunately, I was never one of those crews, but that's usually, like, typically the only time that a launch crew will actually get to launch.
Yeah.
So everybody's chomping at the bit to get that assignment.
Right. Yeah. Because you can probably do things in the simulator all day long, but it's not quite like an actual.
Right.
Launch. Yeah. I'm going to share this photo again. So this is sort of an underground cutout of a potential.
Just kind of like what it looks like underground. So what we call this the capsule, because it kind of looks like a pill.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a concrete bunker 60 to 100 feet underground. You take an elevator to get down. If the elevator is broken, then you have to take a ladder, which 100-foot ladder, that's interesting, let me tell you.
Right.
But you go down and then you get locked behind 2 multi-ton blast doors. So that's always kind of a weird feeling on the first time. Like, okay, this is kind of weird. Supposedly you can kind of see there's like this little chute coming out of the capsule, and they call it the emergency escape tunnel, but we're pretty sure that's not a thing. Well, at least, or they're there, but they haven't been opened, and since the 60s, and they've probably been paved over at this point. So we just, it was always kind of a joke, inside joke of, like, once you're in, there's no getting out.
There's no getting out. Wow. I suppose you got to have a sense of humor in these things.
There's the military is famous for its dark humor.
Right. It is. Yeah. So then from there, you actually went to flight school. Tell us more about that, about Florida.
Yeah. So
I guess there's also Texas.
Yeah, Texas and Florida. It was like this. It was this whole event. But like my senior year, I'll backtrack a little bit. So my senior year of college, I had already gotten my assignment to be a space and missile officer. But I also got an opportunity that year to kind of go on an Air Force ROTC. It was kind of just like a base visit, if you will, just to learn more about the Air Force before you actually before you actually enter full time. So I had an opportunity to get a flight, kind of just a flight in the backseat of one of these T-6 Texan airplanes, actually, that you see behind me. This was while I was still a college student. And like after that flight, I was like, this is amazing. I want to fly. It hadn't even occurred to me before then, which is kind of ironic considering I was in the Air
Going
Force.
in the Air Force, but
you know, whatever.
Right.
But like I said, I already had my assignment at that point to be a space and missile officer. So I was like, well, I'm going to have to put the flying on hold for now. But the Air Force has a program that you can apply for flight school once you're already in. So that was kind of my game plan while I was in North Dakota. I worked on getting my private pilot's license, learned how to fly in North Dakota, and then started applying for the Air Force flight school program. And then in 2012, I was a captain at that point. I was selected for flight school. And so moved from North Dakota. After 4 years in North Dakota, moved to Texas to go to Air Force pilot training. And so this is me after my first solo flight in the T-6. So tired, but happy. And that was a lot of fun getting to fly that. But yeah, so long story short, it wasn't meant to be because after roughly 2 years of various flavors of flight school, I was medically disqualified for a kidney stone, of all things.
Oh, really?
So the kidney stone was no fun. Getting medically disqualified, that wasn't very fun either.
Yeah.
But at the same time, zero regrets. You know, it wasn't God's plan.
Yeah.
And as one door closed in aviation, other doors opened. So yeah, it was still something that I'm glad I got to do. Right. But it was 2 years of my career. So it was definitely a significant part.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I can imagine that wanting to fly. I mean, you know, being a pilot is obviously there's a lot of, it's exciting in some ways. It's certainly prestigious. There's a lot of career opportunities there. Of course, Steve is a pilot who chimed in the comments there. But yeah, it's they're very, very stringent about that stuff. I know that
they are.
I know Ryan Matson wanted to be a pilot and I believe was also medically discharged for something, or, you know, medically disqualified or whatever,
sure.
from that. So he ended up in aeronautical engineering instead, where he engineered, you know, repairs on F-15s and stuff like that. But yeah, that is interesting. I had no idea that you had kind of gone through flight training, and I mean, technically you are a pilot, you know, just not necessarily a fighter pilot in the Air Force. Yeah,
and it was kind of random too. Like you just mentioned, Steve Stottinger. So like he's a cousin of mine on my dad's side, and he was actually at Texas, just leaving Texas as I was getting to Texas. Okay. So we kind of got to do like a quick high five. But again, it was just kind of cool to see a familiar face in a completely random place like a Texas border town. So yeah, you never know who you might run into in the airport.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. So really quick, you mentioned you were a captain when you went there. What's the promotion process like? Like how do you get selected for promotion? Do you have to apply for it? Is it just something that kind of comes randomly? Like, do you kind of know it's going to happen? You know, how do promotions work?
Like half and half. Okay. So yes to both. So you start out, at least on the officer side, start out as a second lieutenant. You're second lieutenant for 2 years, and then you promote to first lieutenant. And that's automatic, provided you didn't commit a crime. Sure. So second lieutenant to first lieutenant, and then at your 4-year mark, you'll promote to captain, and that is also automatic. So I was at my 4-year mark when I was in North Dakota, so that was where I promoted from first lieutenant to captain. That was automatic. And then So that would have been in 2011. I'm getting
Mhm.
math. It's hard. But, and then in 2018, I promoted to major, and that is a little harder to get. You don't apply for it, but it is a promotion board that they will review all your records. And if you have met certain criteria and your records are strong, then they'll recommend you for promotion to major. So I've made it that far. Next year, I'll be eligible for a promotion to lieutenant colonel. So
Okay.
we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Yeah, lieutenant colonel, that's getting up there in
It
the
is. I
ranks.
know. Insert old jokes here.
Right. Yeah. I know my uncle Michael Candle, he was enlisted in the Army, and then he went to college and got a commission in the Air Force. And as he was kind of going through his officer training, they called him Colonel because he was so much older than everybody at the time. It was kind of funny. Just all of his classmates. Okay, so after flight school and kind of that part of your career behind you, then you in 2014 went back, sort of, but in a different way, to space in satellite operations in Schriever
Yep.
Air Force Base, Colorado. And then you have a note here that you also transitioned from active duty to reserve during this time as well. So talk about satellite operations, how you kind of got assigned there or picked it, and then how that was different.
Yeah. So after the Air Force disqualified me from flying, they kind of gave me three options. They're like, well, you can get out, you can go back to missile operations, or you can transfer to space operations. So what do you want to do? It's like, well, let's see what this space stuff is all about. So that was my choice. And from there, so they assigned me to Schriever Air Force Base, now Schriever Space Force Base, Colorado. And that is, yep, there it is in the picture there. So Schriever is in the foreground, so all of those brown buildings, and the little white golf ball looking things, those are satellite antennas. And yeah, Schriever is, most of the military satellites are operated from this location, and that includes GPS satellites, which is what I think most people are probably familiar with. I actually never worked with GPS, but worked in the same building as the GPS satellites are operated from here. So I spent almost 7 years now, I think, out at this base out in the prairies of Colorado. Colorado's kind of where I say it's like where the prairie meets the mountains, because you can see Pikes Peak in the background there, which is just gorgeous. So I always get a gorgeous view driving from work every day.
Well, whenever you hear Colorado, you always think like beautiful landscape. And
it is.
This picture does not do anything to dissuade that, because that's amazing.
It is gorgeous. Yeah. They call Pikes Peak America's Mountain because that's actually where the song America the Beautiful was inspired from. So,
oh, really?
Anyway, fun fact.
Yeah,
but
that is cool.
Yeah, I got to Colorado Springs in 2014, and my first assignment was working for the Air Force Satellite Control Network, which the best way I can describe it is kind of air traffic control for satellites. And it's this series of antennas that we have stationed around the globe. I think it's like kind of maybe the next picture.
Okay.
And yeah, so the Air Force has antennas all over the world that they use to connect to all of the military and government satellites that we own and operate, which are hundreds. And the unit that I was assigned to was in charge of deconflicting satellite times on the antennas, because you could only have one satellite connected to an antenna at a time. And so it would be like, okay, satellite A, you get 10 minutes on antenna B, and then satellite C and D and E and so on and so forth. And when there's hundreds of satellites, that can get confusing really quickly.
Wow, no kidding.
But that was kind of just an interesting assignment to start space with. And then you can see there's an antenna in New Hampshire. So that one was always my favorite.
Oh yeah. Well,
but all over the globe though.
Yeah, I see one way up north in Greenland.
Yeah.
So you say that like you can only have a certain number of satellites, like one satellite connected to an antenna. That is not what I have in my brain usually when I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking of, just what I envision is you're in this room and you have all these monitors, and every satellite, has a live feed at all times and things like that. That's just not the case, right?
It depends on the system.
Okay.
There are other antennas that aren't shown on this picture.
Yeah.
And some satellites are built with their own dedicated antenna that only that satellite can use. But these are kind of the general purpose antennas that the Air Force and now Space Force uses for the satellites that don't need 24/7 like connectivity.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends. The scenario that you described does exist, but not in this particular setup.
Makes sense. So you mentioned here that you transitioned from active duty to reserve. Are you in the reserve right now?
I am. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of a decision probably in the 2016 timeframe. So the thing with active duty is that they tell you when and where you are going to move, and you do not have a lot of say in that. And I decided that maybe I didn't like being told where I was going to move. So there were a lot of reserve opportunities at Schriever, the base that I was stationed at, and I got an opportunity to join a reserve space squadron. Okay. And I jumped at that opportunity, and what that did is gave me a lot more control over my assignment process. So as a reservist, if I want to move to another base, then I will just apply to go to that base, and just on my own. Like the Air Force doesn't tell me when and where. And if I don't want to move, then I don't apply. Yeah. So there's some pros and cons to a reservist because the reserve is so much smaller. There's a lot less opportunity. So it's less opportunity, but more flexibility over your assignments. Whereas active duty is more opportunity, but less control over your assignments. So it's kind of like poison. And then the reserve, typically you think of a reservist as part-time. You can only work 1 weekend a month, which is typical of most reservists, but there's also full-time reserve opportunities, which is what I am. So I've been full-time the entire time that I've been in the reserve, which is kind of unusual, but that's kind of where I ended up. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, talk about this one.
Yeah. So the reserve squadron that I went to, they operate the satellites that you see on the screen here. They co-operate, I should say, with an active duty squadron. So this satellite program is called the Geosynchronous Space Situational Awareness Program, which is a mouthful. We call it GSAP for short because everything in the military is an acronym. Right. But these satellites are probably about the size of a kitchen stove, just for some context. And they're basically just really big cameras in space. And if you go to the next picture, I think, so the geosynchronous belt, this is an area in space. It's about 22,000 miles from Earth along the equator. And there's a lot of satellites stationed here. A lot of communication satellites are here. It's just an ideal space and like an ideal place to put comm satellites. The military has
geosynchronous, meaning they don't move in relation to the Earth. They rotate around at the same velocity that the Earth rotates.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So they stay over the exact same point of Earth. Yeah. Can
they only be at the equator?
That's the ideal spot. Yeah, it's just like around the equator, roughly 22,000 miles, and so we call that the geo belt. So the military has a lot of sensitive satellites there that we care a lot about.
Yeah.
And so the program that I worked with, there's 6 satellites that would basically patrol the belt and just move back and forth with their observation sensors and just keep an eye on things, kind of like neighborhood watch in space.
Yeah.
So that program was declassified in 2014. So
Okay.
within the last 9 years is right when I got to Schriever.
Mm-hmm.
So before that, we couldn't even say that it existed. But now it's on Google, so it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of my concerns coming into this, was like, what can I ask and what can I not? But you've been pretty free with things.
Yeah, so my rule of thumb is like, if you can find it on Google, it's okay to talk about. So all of these pictures, right from Google.
Yeah, right from Google. There you go. Yeah. Very cool. Let's see. By the way, Diane Matson says that she's watching, and Chuck Waldall and Christine Stewart as well. All right. Cool. And then let's see. So did we have another photo? We do. Weather satellite.
Yeah. So this was a program that I worked on fairly recently.
Mm-hmm. I guess I might have jumped ahead because there was a Air Command and Staff College master's degree program that we should talk about as well. Don't want to cut you off there, but.
Oh yeah, no. So just like between, let's see.
Is 2019 to 2020, it says here.
Yeah, so 2019, I applied for a master's degree program through the Air Force and was selected. And that was, so it was called Air Command and Staff College. So I went to Alabama, moved there in 2019 through 2020. So I was in Alabama when COVID hit.
Oh, wow.
Which was less than ideal.
Yeah.
But so did a master's program through the Air Force, kind of graduated with a master's in military studies, essentially. So kind of a year of just studying military history, military doctrine, strategy. And it was interesting, minus the part that halfway through the school year, everything went to remote learning because of COVID.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it was less than ideal.
Yeah.
Because remote learning is not my favorite.
No, it's tough.
So after that, so I requested to go back to Colorado after I was done with the master's program, and so that worked out, and that was where I got an assignment with the Weather Satellite Squadron.
Okay, so then let's move to the weather part. So back at Schriever. And now this part, I want to take a little quick sideline here. Yeah. This is where the Space Force comes in. So the Space Force was like a big, like political news, I guess, within the US, like the president is establishing a Space Force. What does this mean? Are we sending, troops up into space? Do we have spaceships with guns on them? Like, what does this look like? And you were part of this transition. So talk about what happened there. Yeah. So it was kind of, it was a little surreal, actually, because I left Schriever Air Force Base in 2019, and it was an Air Force Base when I left. And December 2019, while I was in Alabama, is when Congress signed the Space Force into law. So Space Force was established December 2019, and I got back to Colorado in early fall of 2020. And I had left an Air Force base and I came back to a Space Force base. And nothing really had changed except for the signs, like all the signs on the buildings. And people's uniforms, they swapped out their name tags on their uniforms for Air Force to Space Force. But it was just a little bit different, just to kind of get into that, like, okay, well, this is a Space Force now. It's its own thing separate from the Air Force. But day to day, nothing changed. The Space Force is still kind of working on trying to establish itself kind of as a separate military service from the Air Force. And there's still a lot of growing pains associated with that. And then for me, was it like 100% like like a split off of the Air Force, or were there other things, other military branches involved in that?
No. So the Air Force, or the Space Force, is still connected to the Air Force in what they call the Department of the Air Force.
Okay.
So there's still some administrative ties, but in like uniforms are different. You know, the budget is different.
Okay.
Just like so.
Is it? This might be a dumb question, but is it similar to how there's a relationship between the Navy and Marines?
It is exactly like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. It's exactly like that. How
Okay.
the Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy.
Okay.
But they're
Sure.
their own thing. Yep.
Okay. Makes sense.
So yeah, there's still Space Force though. When Congress signed Space Force into law, they only authorized that the active duty space operators to transfer, and they did not authorize the reserve space operators to transfer. So I've been in this weird limbo for the last 3 years of where I've just been telling people that I'm an Air Force reservist doing Space Force things. and Congress still hasn't made up their mind. They still have no idea what to do with the space reservists. So we're all still in the Air Force.
Wow. That is interesting. So I mean, I don't know, like in your experience, do you know sort of why they made this change? Obviously we see sort of the public, what they say publicly, but do you kind of have an idea of why they made that change to make it so that this was a separate entity?
I think, well, like everything comes back to money, I think, in the end.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe a little bit a cynical view, but well, it was still part of the Air Force. Like a lot of stuff could happen behind the scenes of where money that was supposed to go towards space systems could get funneled off into air systems, and then
I see.
Space could end up getting the short end of the stick. Sometimes I don't necessarily think it was as dire as it like the situation wasn't dire,
right?
But it definitely happened, and I think a lot of it was just to make the budgeting a little bit more transparent in one aspect, and then it might have also been a little bit related to the administration at the time. It just, they saw an opportunity, and
right,
it made sense to them.
Yeah. I mean, just looking from an outsider, in some ways it made sense. Like, that you, like, it's called the Air Force. There's no air in space. So what are they doing there? Right. Not that it always has to make that much sense, but, and also the fact that now there are some things kind of unlocking outside of our atmosphere, with SpaceX and Starlink and some of the exploration, Mars, all that stuff. Of course, you also have NASA as well involved in some of the stuff. Like, is there sort of a place where Space Force is military, but then you have NASA. So like, what's the overlap? What's the division there? How does that work?
Yeah, so there's definitely like space agencies will work with the Space Force. So, just like anybody with a vested interest in space, so there's definitely collaboration between the military and then other government agencies like NASA, or civilian companies like SpaceX. There's definitely a lot of collaboration there. But just activity in space in general has just been exploding in the last few years, and it is just, I mean, SpaceX is launching satellites every week.
Yeah.
and China is becoming more and more advanced, near peer competitor in space, and they're getting bolder. And at some point, there does have to be just somebody whose job it is to to just keep space in check. And the Space Force, I mean, like their brand new service, they're still working things out, but that'll eventually, they're going to be the ones that are keeping things under control in the space, in space, especially as things get busier and more populated, and potentially there's more actual human activity with actual humans in space. So we'll see what happens in the next decade or two.
Yeah, it seems like a very interesting time to be connected to the Space Force. So you were doing, so there's weather satellites. I can show that picture again here.
Yeah.
And that's what you were doing 2020 to 2022.
Yeah. So after when I requested to get assigned back to Colorado Springs, I found an assignment with a reserve squadron that operates these weather satellites. It's called the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program, or DMSP. And these satellites are huge. These are probably closer, I don't know, to the size of like a 15 passenger van, maybe.
Oh, wow.
And they're
Okay.
also much closer to Earth. So like previous satellite program that I was working with was 22,000 miles away from Earth. These satellites are only 450 miles from Earth, what we call low Earth orbit. And that's especially because they just really need to be closer to get really good high quality images of weather patterns on the Earth.
And this means that they move. They are not geosynchronous.
Right, yes. So these satellites are going around the Earth, typically over the poles, every 90 minutes. So that translates to going about 17,000 miles per hour.
Okay.
Pretty fast.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But yeah, these are, they're taking, like constantly taking pictures of the surface of the Earth. And so tracking things like hurricanes and just, weather patterns in general. The military does use this data, but they share it with civilian agencies. So this data gets fed into the weather models that you would pull up on your phone.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like restricted only to the military.
Yeah.
And
I was just going to say, Trisha Matson says Aunt Trisha is watching from Florida. And then Allison Lampinen says, hi, Lena, miss you, text me. And Phyllis says, hi, Lena.
Hi, everyone.
Very cool. So that kind of brings us to closer to the present here. So, and I don't know if there was another, let's see here. Oh, this is when you were promoted to major.
Yeah, this was just my major promotion ceremony in 2018. Okay. Yeah, in Colorado, and my brothers Brandon and Carl got to come out and pin on my new rank. So that was awesome to have them. That's
very cool. Yeah, neat to see them there. And here's the shine. Oh, we're going to be talking about that in a bit here. Actually, right now, pretty much. So talk about the missile warning operations. North American Aerospace Defense, the NORAD command at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado. So yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so just a few months ago, I had the opportunity to move from Schriever Space Force Base to Peterson Space Force Base. They're both in Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs has, I think, 6 military bases in it. It's very military heavy community. But I got a new assignment offer at Peterson working with NORAD, so short for North American Aerospace Defense Command. And kind of what NORAD does is, I call it kind of the 911 call center for America.
Okay.
And they are monitoring air, land, sea, space, cyberspace for threats to North America and responding to those. And not just threats, but also like natural disasters. NORAD would be kind of in charge of coordinating all of the different government agencies to respond to a natural disaster. So it's kind of really defense of the homeland. And my specific job in NORAD is missile warning. So my job, any missile or rocket launch that occurs anywhere in the world, I will get an indication, will come across my screen, a missile has launched, this is the type of missile, this is where it launched from, and this is where it's going. And so I'll track that. And then within minutes, I am on the phone to the Pentagon and the White House to report the missile and whether or not it is a threat to North America, if it's a threat to our allies or troops overseas, or if it's a threat to the president. So
you have the red phone. You can pick up the phone and call the president.
not the president,
quite.
but his security team.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, that definitely it's been interesting, especially with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because every missile that gets launched, I will get an indication on my screen.
Is that right? And there's quite a few. I mean, we're not talking like shoulder fired, ground missiles necessarily. We're talking things that go up, probably, right? Like that.
Right.
Every distance to them.
Yeah. So anything again, and every space launch that goes, SpaceX launch, they launch some Starlinks.
Right.
That comes across my screen too.
Yeah. Very interesting. So if we hear about something happening, North Korea is testing something or whatever, or threatening doing something, you've already known about it for a long time. You've been doing your protocols. That is fascinating to me. So by the way, Judy Lappy says this is very interesting. Thanks for doing this. Norma Matson says, hi, Alina. Wanda says, been watching, very interesting. Ruth Ann says, no stress. Proud of you, Alina. And Phyllis asks a question. Did you have anything to do with tracking the Chinese spy balloon that came across America?
So funny you should ask. So yes.
Really?
So I did get a front row seat to that. And so that was classified as an air event, and my specific job is missile events.
Sure.
So I wasn't directly involved, but I did get to watch the whole thing because the air section sits right next to me on the operations center floor. So NORAD was involved with tracking and shooting down that balloon, and it was fascinating to see it behind the scenes.
That is fascinating. Yeah, that's wow. It's one of those things that's kind of happening in probably a lot more slow motion than the stuff that you would typically be trained for. A missile is going to come a lot faster than a balloon, but still very fascinating because there's a lot of political, of course, defense related, policy related things that kind of have to come in to that whole thing. You can't just be like, oh, let's just shoot it down,
Right. Yep. No, there's a lot that happens behind the scenes.
Right.
And then just kind of as a point of interest, since the media is reporting it as of a few hours ago.
Oh,
so
okay.
I can say this now. But if you Google high altitude object over Alaska, that was a recent breaking news as of today. And I was on shift last night when that
happened
as well.
Wow.
Yes. So I can't say anything more beyond what the media is reporting on that. But again, it's kind of really fascinating to get a like I said, a front row seat to some of these things that we're tracking along our borders and in our airspace.
Right. Exactly. Well, I think this is a perfect opportunity to say thank you for your service, because this is something that's very directly related to our security, national security. So we appreciate it.
I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, very awesome. Let's take a look at this photo, Cheyenne Mountain. You have a note. What's really hiding under Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado? Now that's, I think, linking to a YouTube video.
I think it's a YouTube.
Yeah. I could probably post that, but yeah, just tell us.
So NORAD primarily they operate out of Peterson Space Force Base, which is within the city of Colorado Springs. But also they do have a backup operations center in the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, which is in the mountain range along the backside of Colorado Springs. And it is an ultra secure military base inside of a mountain. And every so often we'll go up and operate out of a Cheyenne Mountain just to stay sharp and practice operations from the mountain. But it is just the coolest thing. I have to pinch myself every time I go inside, because it's just not everyone gets to say that they're going to work inside the mountain today.
This is like a backup, kind of like more secure location, or it's an active one that's constantly manned?
It's a backup. A backup. It's not like constantly manned right now. But just in case there was, heightened hostilities or, some
Right.
kind of natural disaster or, something where we just need to be a little bit more secure.
Yeah.
Another place to go to keep operations going.
Yep. Makes sense. Well, that totally makes sense, because you don't want your command centers to be, and control centers to be vulnerable. Let's see here. So there was another photo. Okay, this is a very interesting photo here.
Yeah, so this is the operations center where on a Peterson Space Force base that NORAD operates out of primarily. And so this is kind of what my job looks like day to day. Just sitting in front of rows and rows of monitors that are all turned off in this photo for security reasons. They're usually not blank, I promise.
Right.
But yeah, it's just the NORAD motto is we have the watch again, because it's kind of just keeping an eye on everything in North America and work closely with Canadians. So that's always kind of fun with the Canadian military in NORAD.
Yeah, we have a close relationship with them. What about Mexico?
Mexico, I mean, it is technically part of North America, but they are not a partner in the NORAD command structure.
Oh, okay.
So you definitely coordinate with Mexico with things that would involve them, but they are not. They're not a military partner.
Okay. Yeah. I think the Mexican military is fairly tiny, generally speaking, anyway. But yeah, this makes sense that Canada, especially with their access to over the poles and stuff like that.
Right.
It makes sense. Very, very interesting. If anybody in chat has questions, please do ask while we've got Alina here. From my perspective, it is really fascinating stuff. The satellite, the different types of satellites, the just kind of sensors and communication between all the different, because that's a big thing, in these types of defense situations. The right people have to know at the right time what's happening, be able to do good decisions, things like that. I know you probably can't talk about this, so I'm just going to talk. But like when the balloon appears, like how soon we see it, when the decision is to shoot it down, what are, can you shoot it down when it's over our territory? Is that too dangerous to potentially do? What are the trade-offs of that? All of those questions that come up. And then of course, if there's a ICBM headed our way, then what do you do?
Right.
Like those are tough decisions. Yeah,
they are. Yeah. And my job is to report, and kind of the generals at the top are ones who they'll take the information and make the final decision. But I kind of get to be the one who gets the initial indications and then make the report and then kind of be a fly on the wall and see what happens after that.
We did get a couple of questions. Clayton Olin says 2 questions. First, and most importantly, have you been on duty and tracked Santa over the US?
So no, actually, because I just finished my training with NORAD in December, and I was not on shift when the Santa tracking occurred. But that is something that NORAD does every year. It's just kind of a fundraiser, event awareness, kind of a fun thing for kids. Like kids can call in to NORAD and ask them where Santa is on Christmas.
That's awesome.
so maybe next year. We'll see.
I didn't realize that was a thing. It's a
cool thing. Yeah.
Wow. Secondly, can you speak to the reasons the balloon was shot down in the time, place, and manner it was?
Not beyond what the Pentagon has briefed. So I know that's the most frustrating non-answer ever.
Yeah, I understand. We don't want to get you in trouble here.
Yeah. So if it came from the Pentagon spokesperson, General Ryder, then that's my answer.
Yeah, when you're active duty or reserve, and honestly even beyond because of the restrictions of the top secret clearances, which I assume you have a pretty high level clearance if you're doing
it's top secret.
Top secret. So it's
Yeah.
the top level. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. And I think the coordination between the Air Force and the Space Force, and the fact that they are kind of still connected, still working together, things like that. What types of things, like, is there's still air stuff happening at your base too? It's not just space, I would assume.
Yes, yeah. So Peterson Space Force Base does have C-130s on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reserve squadron of C-130s though,
Okay.
and they have
So still technically Air Force then, if it
still
was.
right.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
still Air Force Reserve, but yeah, I think it's a Space Force base with a runway. so that's kind of interesting.
Instead of a launch pad. Yeah.
So there's definitely coordination between the
Mhm.
between the two services still. It's very, very strong.
Yeah. I've wondered, like, does it ever make sense for Space Force to have its own space rockets to send up satellites and stuff? Because usually you're, I would assume, hitching a ride with SpaceX or something like that these days, if you want to send a satellite up.
Yeah, SpaceX is definitely, like, the Air Force or Space Force has definitely started using SpaceX to put satellites into orbit, but there are still government programs, government rockets that will send satellites up as well.
Oh,
They're
I
just
see.
SpaceX is just still, they can do it for less money, so it's a lot more cost effective.
Yeah.
And they figured out how to make the dollars make sense.
Yeah.
So SpaceX has definitely become a go-to, but for some of the bigger satellites that need bigger rockets, that's there's still some other rockets that the Space Force depends on. But we'll see what the next 10, 20 years bring, and what kind of technology advances there are.
Yeah. It occurred to me that in your current role, it's kind of full circle, because you started out on the other end of the missile launchers. Like you were on the not pushing the button, but you know what I mean?
Turning the keys.
Yeah, turning the keys to send the rocket, to send the missile up. And now you're on the other end where you're like, okay, now someone did launch. So in some ways, maybe your earlier experience would help you in what you're doing now. Just kind of understanding how the other side happens
in surprising ways. I'll be on shift and something random will pop up, and I'll be like, oh, you know what, I remember this from when I was a lieutenant back in North Dakota, and it's always kind of surprising to see when those connections happen.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, I think I'm not going to take any longer of your evening, but I know this is your day off. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your knowledge and whatnot. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I guess, I don't know, like, how much longer of a career would you potentially have in the military? Is it, you still have quite a while?
Yeah, so I'll be eligible for retirement, which is crazy, and in 5 years.
In 5 years.
In 5 years, yeah. So I'll be eligible to retire with full retirement benefits at 43.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I take every year at a time. You never know, but like right now, like my goal is to make it those last 5 years to get to retirement, call it a career, and then see what happens. I don't think I'll stay past that. I don't have any desire to be General Matson. Doesn't sound like my cup of tea.
Yeah.
So Lord willing, I'll be able to finish 20, retire, and then find something else to do. Yeah. Having the retirement is nice, because then you kind of it takes the urgency out of it, and you can do something that would be fun for you. It's interesting to you. That is one of the benefits of going into the military and serving for 20 years, for sure. So let's see, I missed a few chats here. Peggy says, very interesting. Ruth Ann says, thank you for all you do, Alina. Love you. Kathy Bergstedt says, very, very interesting. Thank you for your service. God bless you.
Phyllis Rakinen, thanks for a great interview, Elena. Thank you for your service. Sandra Matson, very interesting, Elena. Thank you for your service. And Hannah Barney, we're grateful for your service and the sacrifices that come with it. And I would agree with that. I mean, even though you're in the reserve and have a little more flexibility, there's still you have obligations, you have responsibilities beyond what probably a normal person would have just in your typical civilian life. You have a lot more flexibility, really. So I would agree with that. There are sacrifices that come with that.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, happy to do it. It's definitely I miss my family. Sure. I miss the Northwest, and with my career field, like there's just no opportunities on the West Coast for me to serve closer to home. So that's
Colorado it is then.
Colorado it is. Yep. It's home for now.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm just so grateful for all the support though from family and friends, that like it really does mean so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I would also be, remiss to say, like all glory has to go to God.
Absolutely.
Because he has absolutely carried me, and I do mean carried me through my career to this point. So I definitely wanted to say that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are ups and downs just like anything. And, during high points, it's a lot of fun, I'm sure, and exciting. And then sometimes there's low points and you're, like you said, not near your family. So that's a piece of that for sure. Very cool. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I saw that our viewership kept climbing as we went further in. You can watch this on both Facebook, if you have Facebook, in the ALC community. There's a link in the comments to a YouTube video as well, so you can send that YouTube video to others. Don't post it publicly. We prefer to keep this more direct, person to person, more within our circles, or circle adjacent if possible. Thanks again, Alina. Really appreciate it. I'm going to probably stop the live stream at some point here if I can figure out how to do it. But thanks everybody for coming in. Thank you, Alina.
Thanks for having me.